Good afternoon, everybody. This is Laura Young from the Department of Psychiatry at UT Tyler Health Science Center and the Robert M. Rogers Department of Psychiatry here at UT Tyler. We're glad that you're here for our session today. Click here, how internet use and social media affect children's mental health. This session is being recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel by the end of the business day tomorrow afternoon. We have with us today Dr. Stephanie Simmons. Dr. Simmons is a frequent presenter for us. We're excited to have her back today. She is a child and adolescent psychologist here at the University of Texas at Tyler Health Science Center, School of Medicine, and the Robert M. Rogers Department of Psychiatry. She holds a doctorate in clinical psychology from Baylor University. She completed her predoctoral internship in community mental health in Cincinnati, Ohio, before returning to Texas for her postdoctoral residency in pediatric psychology at Texas Scottish Rite Hospital for Children. Dr. Simmons currently serves as the training director for the psychology internship program here at UT Tyler Health Science Center and provides outpatient psychological services to children, adolescents, and their families. She's passionate about training and education, specifically in the areas of trauma prevention, and intervention. So I'll turn this over to Dr. Simmons right now. Thank you so much again for presenting for us today, Dr. Simmons. And here you go.
Great, thanks, Laura. Okay, I am going to go ahead and see if I can get technology to cooperate with me.
Looks good.
Okay, perfect. Well, I appreciate everybody being here today. This is a topic that I talk a lot with families about, so I'm excited to talk about it with all of y'all today. Laura already introduced me, but I am Stephanie Simmons, one of our psychologists here at the Health Science Center. I've been at the Health Science Center for about 5 years now, and work pretty heavily both in the training side as well as the academic side. As we go through this, I am more than happy to answer questions. You're free to use the chat. I believe we will have time for questions at the end as well. So definitely be thinking about things that would feel helpful for us to discuss. By the end of today, I'm hoping that everyone will walk away with a few things. First, want us to leave today with a better understanding of how social media, internet usage, and video games affect children and adolescents, both positively and negatively. I hope that we all also leave with a better understanding of how can we support children and adolescents in using the internet, using social media in a healthy and adaptive way, and enabling parents to have those conversations with their kids. And then also, again, want to talk about how parents can monitor internet usage and make sure that kids are using the internet safely. Before discussing anything about effects and usage and anything like that, I always like to start out with just a good review of what recommended screen time actually looks like from the Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. The Academy of American Pediatrics has very similar recommendations. So you'll see that babies, so 0 to 18 months, the recommendation is actually no screen time at all, with the exception of video chatting with an adult. So things like FaceTime calls with grandparents, those are approved of, but really no screen time outside of that. Once we hit toddlers, so 18 to 24 months, typically less than an hour a day. And that is with specific caveats. So educational programming, co-watching with a caregiver, not just putting kiddo in front of a TV and letting them watch whatever. Younger kids, it's recommended about 0 to 3 hours, so still very, very little. Ideally, still focus more heavily on educational programming. Kids and teenagers, 6 to 17, that's a very wide age range, but roughly 2 hours of screen time on weekdays. So that can be making sure that they're setting healthy limits. We'll talk more about that. this is difficult because we do know that kids are on screens for homework and things like that. So we really want to be thinking more so about like their leisure screen time. And then teens and adults, typically 2 to 4 hours per weekday, with breaks built in and making sure that they have plenty of time for other things. I know that this is a good probably time for us all to take accountability of our screen time as well, and thinking about that 2 to 4 hours applying to adults in addition to kids. So we know that these are kind of our recommendations. Very little screen time, mostly focused on educational programming. How does that actually compare to how kids and adolescents are using the internet? What we know is that kids and teens in the US are spending more time than ever using screens and using social media. 95% of teenagers have access to a smartphone. 90% have access to a computer. 83% have access to a gaming console. So, main takeaway, almost every single child that we know that we are going to come in contact with has access to the internet in some way, shape, or form. The number of hours spent online has also risen sharply. Teens who say they are online almost constantly has roughly doubled since 2015. On average, teens are spending about 4.8 hours per day just on social media. So this is not counting TV, video games, time that they're spending on a computer for homework. This is just on social media. But we also know that more than half of US teens spend an average of almost 7.5 hours of total daily screen time. That's almost half their waking hours, and that's the majority of teens. That's how much they are spending. The charts and diagrams that you see listed on the slide is really just a more in-depth breakdown of what kids are doing online, what social media platforms are most popular, as well as looking at some specifics related to demographics. So as you can see on the right, YouTube remains the most used social media app by far. 93% of teenagers report that they use YouTube. TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram are also heavily used. And then kind of the bottom cluster, Facebook, Discord, WhatsApp, Twitch, Twitter, all of those still fairly regularly used, but significantly less often. You can see that Facebook has been on a significant decline, while YouTube, TikTok, things like that have stayed relatively stable. On the left, we see just, again, some specific demographics. We know that many kids turn to screens for entertainment connection to find friends during the pandemic, and that has stayed fairly consistent even since then. What we know is that screen use is highest among kids from low-income families as well as children of color. There is some theories that low-income families or children of color may use screens more out of necessity. So they may live in more unsafe neighborhoods where it's not safe to go outside and play. Maybe families are working multiple jobs, and so there's more reliance on screen time. There's a lot of different theories of why that might be. We also know that on average, boys are spending more time on screens compared to girls, but that number is getting progressively smaller. And we know that teens across the board are using social media and the internet fairly heavily. So why does this all matter? Why do we care? Research heavily supports that too much screen time can have negative outcomes for our teens and our children and our adolescents. So we know that too much screen time can be linked to sleep problems if we're disrupting our normal circadian rhythm, if we're having too much exposure to blue light, or even if we're just opting to be on screens instead of sleeping. It can lead to lower grades in school, again, if we're dedicating too much time to screens, not enough time to homework. Children and adolescents may read fewer books,
You turn it off for a little bit, okay?
Spend less time with family and friends, spend less time outdoors doing physical activity. And that lack of physical activity, spending time outdoors, that can lead to weight problems, mood problems, poor self-image and body image issues, fear of missing out, as well as just less time learning other ways to relax and have fun. Now, this is especially important to think about during the adolescent time period because adolescents are specifically vulnerable to a lot of different things during that period of development between 10 and 19 years old. We know that the brain is undergoing a lot of different developments, which makes it especially sensitive to things like risk-taking behaviors and impulsivity. Those are at a peak during our teenage years. Our overall well-being also experiences the greatest fluctuations. So we may have really high highs during adolescence as well as really low lows. We see the most mental health challenges emerge during that adolescent time frame. And we also know that this is really the time frame where identities and self-worth is really starting to be more cemented. We also know that the adolescent brain is especially sensitive to social pressures, peer pressures, comparisons, anything related to their peers. Teenagers are going to be very, very sensitive to and aware of. That's always been the case throughout the history of humanity. And the issue is that when faced with social media, we now have the whole world to compare ourselves to. And a whole lot more people to be putting in their opinions and their ideas of what is appropriate. Too much social media and really just social media usage on a whole can be associated with distinct changes in the brain. So early research has shown that there may be changes in the amygdala related to emotional learning and behavior. Our prefrontal cortex, that has everything to do with impulse control, decision-making, emotional regulation, all of those things that can be affected by screen time and social media usage. There may be increased sensitivity to rewards and punishments, so more sensitivity to really looking for that immediate reward, immediate payoff, and also being very sensitive to punishments or negative interactions. And social media usage may also be associated with more emotional sensitivity, again, to those online interactions and communications. So we may be really invested when they're going well, but really exhausted or upset when those communications and those interactions are not going well. No, I'm not here to say that social media is all doom and gloom and all terrible, because we know that that's not true. There are benefits of social media use. The influence and really determining when social media is beneficial is shaped by a lot of different complex factors. So that may include the amount of screen time, what an adolescent is looking at or consuming, how well those interactions are going, as well as to the degree to which internet use disrupts normal daily activities like sleep or exercise. It's also important to note that children and adolescents are affected by the internet very differently than adults and in different ways from each other, depending on their individual strengths, individual vulnerabilities, cultural backgrounds, socioeconomic factors. So there's no way to know exactly how social media or internet usage is going to affect a child. There is pretty broad agreement that social media has the potential to both benefit and harm children and adolescents. Some potential benefits include providing a positive community or connection with others. There may be more opportunities to have positive interactions with more diverse peer groups that are available offline. This is especially important when we're thinking about our minority groups, as well as just our living in a rural area. The internet may be a really important source of social support for some of our ethnic minorities, our gender minorities, sexual identity minorities. They may not have a lot of connection with peers, through school or church or things like that. And so the internet can really serve as a proxy. So we know that studies have shown that social social media can support mental health and well-being of LGBTQ plus youth by enabling that connection, giving them room to explore their identity and offer social support. Similarly, 70% of adolescent girls of color in one study reported that they encountered positive or identity affirming content related to race on social media that was beneficial for their well-being. In the general population, about 58% of adolescents feel that social media helps them feel more accepted. 67% like having people that can support them in tough times. Over 70% like having a place where they can show their creative side. And 80% feel more connected to what's going on in their friends' life. So the majority of teenagers are telling us that it feels good to use social media. I can connect with my friends. I feel more involved in their lives. I feel like I can be creative, and I feel like I'm getting support. Additionally, research suggests that social media-based and other digital mental health interventions may be helpful in connecting adolescents to behavioral health care. I'm sure that all of you on this call know today that there is a behavioral health care shortage, and it's hard to get adolescents not only to want to go and see a therapist or be involved in behavioral health care, but then also finding appropriate referrals that are accessible. And so there are new interventions that are coming out online that may increase that access. While these are all great benefits, a 2022 survey suggested that kids were not primarily using screens to stay in touch with peers. So the primary use of social media was not to stay in touch with peers. They were mostly kind of spending time watching television, gaming. So for example, in that same study, teens reported spending more than 3 hours a day watching television and nearly 2 hours a day gaming. So again, going back to this idea of the potential benefits of internet and social media use are really going to depend on what that time actually looks like, is dedicated to, and how the teenager is actually feeling about it. So again, kind of back to potential harms. We touched on a fair number of these, but wanted to go into a few more specifics. A large 2013 survey found that spending more than 3 hours per day on social media sites. Now, again, remember the average is just over 4. So that average is actually higher than that 3 hours, but more than 3 hours per day was linked to a significantly higher risk of mental health concerns. And those findings have been replicated multiple times. Similarly, overall screen time has been linked to depression as well as suicidal behavior in adolescents. However, the correlation really depends on, again, how youth are using social media. So, for example, if they have kind of gotten into wormholes where they are viewing illegal acts, in spaces where they are talking about or being exposed to self-harming behaviors, eating disorders, those are obviously going to contribute significantly more strongly to mental health concerns compared to other types of content. Online content may be even more risky for adolescents who already have a mental health condition. We know that things like discrimination, cyberbullying can really exacerbate anxiety and depression. Outside of mental health concerns, again, we touched on these, we can have distraction from life activities like homework and exercise. We may have disrupted sleep, exposure to information that's biased and not correct. Enabling too much personal information to share is a big one. There is not a lot of education on safe ways to or what is safe to disclose online. And so it's risky for teenagers and children to be doing that unsupervised. There's a risk of exposure to online predators. And then we touched on the ideas of negative impacts to mental health and well-being. So what do we do about it? How can parents actually keep kids safe online and help them develop healthy screen time behaviors? So first and foremost, we want to make sure that screen time is developmentally appropriate. that 0 to 18 months, really keeping it limited to video chatting with family. As we get to that kind of toddler age, educational programming primarily with the caregiver sitting there with them. And then limiting non-educational programming and screen time as kids get older. We always want to turn off screens during family meals and outings. I know that this is very easy, if you're at a restaurant, if you're in the car, and kids are disruptive and squirmy, it's easy to pull out a phone or a tablet. But we really want to limit that so that we're making sure that there is time for family connections, spending time outdoors with friends, that we're still getting those connections that kids really need and thrive on. I encourage all parents to learn about and use parental controls. I have a couple of recommendations. While their kids may get around these on occasion, if those can be in place, it does have some sort of control, even if it's just kind of cutting off screen use at a certain amount of time. We always want parents to avoid using screens as pacifiers, babysitters, or ways to stop tantrums or to soothe children. We need parents to be teaching kids ways to emotionally regulate that do not rely on screens. Finally, we always want to make sure that we are turning off screens and removing them from bedrooms 30 to 60 minutes before bedtime. That's really important just to decrease that level of stimulation that the brain is getting before bedtime, and also to remove that blue light so that our brain knows that it's time to start winding down, it's time to start going to sleep, and we're not disrupting that normal circadian rhythm. Some additional recommendations for parents. Parents should always know what their children are watching and what advertising they're seeing. I always encourage parents, watch things with your kids so that you're familiar with what programming they're being exposed to so that you know that it's age appropriate. Also, talk to your kids about what they're seeing. Point out good behavior such as cooperation or friendship or concern for others, and make connections to meaningful events or places of interest. We always want to be aware of advertising as well, and being able to talk with kids about what they're seeing in ads. We want to encourage healthy habits outside of screen time. So encouraging kids to have other activities and other hobbies, whether that be sports or music or art, any sort of hobbies that don't involve screen time. This is a tough one, but parents really should be striving to set a good example with their own safe and healthy screen habits. I was looking over this presentation since the last time I gave it, and really had to stop and reflect. I've had a baby since then and was like, you know what? I probably need to be more conscious about when I'm using my phone around him, what I'm modeling, and what he's seeing from me. As I mentioned, there's not a lot of education about online privacy and safety. So parents should be very actively talking to their kids about what is safe and not safe to share online. It's easy for a child to believe that the person they're talking to is their same age just because they said they are. Kids are naturally very trusting. And so it's up to parents to really help them understand that people can say anything they want online, and it's really unsafe for them to be sharing their name, their age, their location, anything like that with unknown people online. Parents should also be very active in deciding when their child is ready for a personal device. Not all kids are ready at the same time. This is going to depend on maturity, their own habits. And so when a child is ready for a cell phone or a laptop or a tablet is going to depend on when that parent feels like the child is ready to handle the responsibility. Encourage using screens in a way that builds creativity and connection with family and friends. We want to make sure that we're tapping into as many of those potential benefits of social media and internet usage as we possibly can. So the more time that we can spend connecting with friends, expressing ourselves creatively, talking with families, those are going to start to give us those benefits rather than all of the risks. And then finally, as I mentioned, consider your child's or your teen's maturities The right plan for one family or one child may not be a good fit for another. So just because, let's say kiddo has hit middle school doesn't mean that they are necessarily ready for full access to an iPhone. That's going to look different for every child. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of parental control apps out there. There's some that are free, some that are paid for. Apple Screen Time and Google Family Link, these just manage the actual amount of time, but they are free and most widely used. They can be used on iPhones, on Androids. Another really popular one is Custodio. I think that they have free and paid versions. There are also things like Bark and Canopy out there. Those three are going to allow more limitations on actual content in addition to time. Obviously, the more that you pay for a plan, the more control that you're going to get. However, I don't want parents to get the idea that only paid apps or paid options are effective. This can also be as simple as changing the Wi-Fi password or turning the Wi-Fi off. I told one parent, take the thing that you actually plug into the wall. If they can't plug their gaming console into the wall, it's impossible for them to play it. So there's also ways to get creative to make sure that those parental controls are in place and that kids are viewing safe and healthy content. So one question that we get a lot is, what about video games? How do video games affect kids and adolescents? So let's talk about the good and the bad. As with anything, there are potential benefits and there are potential risks to video games. So some of the benefits, if we are playing video games that have to do with problem solving, things like that, there can be improved performance on cognitive skills tests, especially those involving impulse control and working memory. A lot of video games involve holding things in working memory, being able to manipulate it and kind of churn it back out. We also know that there can be improved problem solving, strategizing, and flexibility, since those are really the skills that video games tap into. There are some games that can improve hand-eye coordination, as well as games that can be physically oriented. So I'm probably aging myself, but there was Wii Fit, where it really encouraged you to get up and move, and those still exist. Those physically oriented games can improve body health and reduce stress. And we also know that video gaming, especially cooperative video gaming, can improve and encourage pro-social behavior, and that has a positive effect on brain structure. So there are some good things that can come out of video games. With that, there are some also not so good things. So some of the risks, very similar to screen time as a whole. Too much video gaming can contribute to less sleep and lower quality sleep, lower academic performance, worse mood, and worse well-being. Video gaming can also increase inattention. Video gaming is very immediate, very highly stimulating. And so when that's what kids are used to, it's sometimes hard for them to transition to activities that are less stimulating, like reading, listening in class, paying attention to their teacher. So we want to make sure they're getting exposure to both sides of the coin. There's a lot of debate about this, but the majority of research does suggest a link between violent video games and aggressive behavior in kids. What children are seeing modeled, they can become less immune to or less sensitive to, which also means they're going to be less sensitive to aggressive behavior overall. Long periods of gameplay can contribute to childhood obesity if they are not out and about, moving, getting exercise, as well as if they are mindlessly eating while playing video games. The more time the kids spend playing video games, the less time they're going to spend socializing with family and friends, building up their social skills, spending time on their other hobbies, and spending less time reading. So it's really a matter of what are we dedicating our time to and what is most important for kids. So again, some recommendations for parents to help support healthy video gaming in their kids. Avoiding video games in preschool aged children. So really waiting until kids are a little bit older to start exposing them to video games. Always check the ratings of games and be aware again of what programming kids are being exposed to. Ratings make it fairly easy, but you can also do a quick Google to figure out what are maybe the questionable things that are coming up in a video game. Play video games with your kids. That's going to help you familiarize yourself with what they're seeing and doing, and also gives you a chance to talk about, again, that cooperation when they're problem solving, things like that. We always want to make sure that there are clear rules about video games that apply to inside and outside the home. So if they are only allowed to play, let's say, G-rated games, that needs to apply when they are at home and when they're at friends' houses. Or similarly, if they're only allowed to play video games for an hour a day, that doesn't mean they can play an hour at home and then go to their friend's house and play for another 2 hours. Sometimes parents will also need to communicate those rules to the parents of kids, like if their kids are going to someone's house. But that can, again, help enforce that structure and those boundaries related to video games. Parents want to be especially sensitive to online gameplay and online interactions. That is a very popular form of social media, or things like Discord, where kids are talking and having interactions while playing video games. Those can also be a little bit harder to monitor. So parents really want to be very sensitive and aware of what those are looking like for their individual kids. I always encourage parents, keep video games in a shared area. So the video game console should live in the living room. Kids do not need game consoles in their room. This not only keeps them interacting with family members more often, but it makes it much easier for parents to see what their kids are playing and how they're responding to those games. Like we said with screen time, parents want to be modeling their own healthy video game usage. This can extend to not only what they're playing, but also how they're reacting to those games. So if you don't want your child to scream and throw down the controller when they lose a game, make sure that you're modeling what to do when the game is not going your way. Enforce total screen time limits. So, if our screen time limit is an hour a day, that's including TV, social media, gaming, all of the above. Always make sure that video games come after required activities. As I mentioned, video games are very stimulating and very rewarding to children and adolescents, especially when we compare it to things like chores or homework that are going to be a whole lot less fun and a whole lot less rewarding. It's much, much easier to ask kids to transition from doing these things that they absolutely must do and using video games as a reward versus trying to transition them from video games to these less enjoyable activities. And similarly, we always want kids to be participating in a variety of activities. So video games and sports, arts, Boy Scouts, or Scouts of America, hanging out with friends, anything like that, to make sure that they are getting out, being physically active, and engaging with peers of their own age. So now I want to transition to talking a little bit about the impact of technology on sexual behaviors, which is always a taboo topic, but something I think is really important for us to think about as providers when we're talking to parents. It's impossible to talk about internet usage without acknowledging the accessibility and presence of pornography. When we're thinking about pornography, we're thinking about professionally derived or user-generated pictures or videos that are specifically intended to sexually arouse the viewer. So videos and pictures can depict sexual activities to a variety of different extents. So this is going to apply to things like TV shows, videos, pictures, anything along those lines. And it's important for us to talk about this because the vast majority of young adults have been exposed to online pornography. It's estimated that approximately 43% of young adults regularly view pornography. And those are the ones who are willing to admit it. But as you can see in the graphic, 93% of boys and 62% of girls have been exposed to internet porn in some way, shape, or form. So it's really not a question of if a child is being exposed to pornography, it's a question of when they see it. It's estimated that about 50% of boys and 40% of girls actively sought out the pornography the first time they saw it. The vast majority are saying that curiosity was their main motivation for seeking that out. But others are exposed inadvertently, whether that be through pop-ups, accidental searches, etc. It's very easy for kids to, we'll take YouTube for example, they may start with a video that is very innocent and very age appropriate, but the more that they click and the more the algorithm runs, they may end up with something that is very inappropriate. When adolescents were asked about their feelings the first time they viewed pornography, they reported feeling curious, shocked, and confused. It's estimated that up to 84% of pornographic content is actually accessed via phone, but there's also a high percentage of adolescents that access pornography via video game consoles. So when parents are thinking about how kids are coming across these things, it's typically not things like magazines or print materials. They're going to be finding it on their phone and even on video game consoles. So another good reason for video game consoles to live in the living room. This slide is a little bit older, but I think it still really illustrates just the easy access to pornography. And we can extrapolate that this was in 2019. If we extrapolate 6 years in the future, we can only imagine what this is looking like. These numbers are pulled specifically from Pornhub, which is a well-used pornography site. They publish a year in review every year, and so these are their 2019 years in reviews. You can no longer access Pornhub in Texas, which is why these are a little bit older numbers. But the main takeaway here is really just looking at how rapidly the pornography industry is growing and how that access is getting easier and easier for our children and adolescents. Just from 2017 to 2019 alone, in 2017, there was an estimated 28.5 billion visits to Pornhub. That jumped to 42 billion visits in 2019. In 2017, there were over 4 million videos uploaded. So if you sat down and watched every single video on Pornhub in 2017, that would be 68 years worth of viewing material. In 2018, that was 6.8 million videos and 169 years worth of digital content just on one site alone. And you see again, the amount of data that's being transferred per second jumped significantly from 2017 to 2019. I think it's also important to point out that 2019 was pre-pandemic. So again, if we extrapolate 6 years in the future and throw a worldwide pandemic in that, we can assume that these numbers have significantly increased and access has gotten even easier. It's also interesting to note that pornography itself is changing, and what the content of pornography looks like is changing over time. You can see I circled some of these that might kind of apply to our children and adolescents. Hentai pornography is specifically pornography based on anime or manga characters. That's something that is wildly popular for adolescents. So again, we can see how easy it would be if they start out searching anime or manga characters, how easy it would be to fall into something that is less appropriate for their age. Stepmom, teen, cartoon, all of these are falling in these top searches. And so again, if we think about how many of our patients are interested in cartoons, anime, things like that, it's really a concerning statistic. So why is all of this concerning, and how does pornography actually affect youth? We know that pornography can impact the developing adolescent mind. So viewing pornography stimulates the amygdala and the HPA axis, which leads to pronounced restrictions in the prefrontal cortex. So if we remember back, the prefrontal cortex has everything to do with impulse control, good judgment, making safe decisions. And when adolescents are viewing pornography, we actually see a significant decrease in all of those things. The more that adolescents are viewing pornography, they can actually develop neural pathways that favor impulsivity and self-gratification when that prefrontal cortex goes offline. So the more and more that we do that, the more and more that we're removing our prefrontal cortex from what it's supposed to be doing, our brain is building a habit that's going to favor, immediate gratification and impulsive behaviors. It's also not surprising that viewing pornography increases dopamine and all of those pleasurable sensations in the adolescent brain. And adolescents love dopamine. So they love those feel-good hormones. And so when they come across something that gives a really big dopamine release and a really big pleasurable response, that's very, very rewarding and something that they are more likely to continue. Something that I think is really important to point out is that youth are more and more using pornography as a form of sex education. And this is really concerning because we know that pornography does not depict safe sex, consensual sex, or sex that is realistic, let alone realistic bodies. And so when youth are using pornography to inform what is normal, what is desirable, they may want to emulate what they're seeing, think that it's realistic, and they may have more positive attitudes towards casual sex. Again, we know that porn bodies are not normal. Porn sex is not safe sex. And so we really want to make sure that kids are getting accurate information from safe places like their parents. I always encourage parents also know what sex education at school looks like so that you can fill in any gaps and know what questions your child might be coming to you with. Along that same line, we also know that pornography is becoming more mainstream and more aggressive. 88% of scenes included some sort of physical aggression, and 48% of scenes contained verbal aggression. So that's really concerning when we think about kids wanting to emulate what they see and thinking that what they're seeing is realistic, safe sex. Some additional effects of pornography. As we kind of touched on, the more and more kids are seeing this, the more they're assuming that it's normal. And so we may be creating unrealistic sexual values or beliefs, as well as higher levels of permissive sexual attitudes. We know that what kids are seeing just in terms of like what body images look like is not realistic. Girls report feeling physically inferior to the women that they're viewing in pornography, while boys are more likely to fear that they may not be able to perform as the men do in this media. Adolescents report that those who are using pornography have lower self-confidence as their development continues. Now, it is important to note that this research is new and notoriously difficult to conduct. A lot of IRBs and even parents, kids don't like talking about their pornography use. And so long-term impacts really require a lot of further investigation. We touched on the idea of increased sexually aggressive behaviors. Kids want to emulate what they see. Increased pornography usage can also contribute to a possible pornography addiction. There's a number of different terms that are used to describe problematic pornographic usage, such as compulsive viewing, impulsive viewing, hypersexual disorder, pornography addiction. And when we think of a behavioral addiction, we have to think of them differently. It's not a physical addiction like one would be physically addicted to a substance, but rather a compulsive behavior that's detrimental to their well-being. So it's taking away from the time they're spending with family and friends, or spending on their homework, or even kind of getting into a realm where maybe they're physically harming themselves. At present, the DSM that we use to diagnose mental health disorders has not included an internet sex addiction as a definitive criterion, but it's largely believed that pornography addiction should be classified differently than just an internet addiction disorder. Pornography can be considered an addiction when viewing becomes obsessive, compulsive, like they feel like they need it or they can't stop, as well as interfering in normal behavior. If you suspect a pornography addiction or just an internet addiction, a referral to a licensed provider with experience treating adolescent addictions is key. This is something that requires some additional work and some additional conversations, and so we want to make sure that we're providing kids with that support. So, recommendations for parents. We need parents to understand that pornography in today's world is changing. So again, that idea that it's not if your kids see it, it's when your kids see it, and you need to be prepared to talk about it. Understand local laws about child-produced explicit images. So for example, sexting or sending sexually explicit images is illegal in Texas, even if there is no adult involved. So if it's one teenager sending sexually explicit images to another teenager, that is still illegal. Now it's classified differently. It's a misdemeanor compared to a felony. However, if those images are distributed without consent and distributed further, that penalty can be a felony. So it's really important for parents to not only know this, but be communicating it to their children. As always, be aware and monitor. Keep electronics in a shared space. Take away phones at night. Pay attention to all forms of media. So tablets from school, laptops, video gaming systems, etc. Consider those parental control apps. Explore family values related to electronic and online behavior. I have a worksheet in a couple of slides that's also included in the handouts that I think is really helpful for parents to be thinking about these things of what is appropriate and what is inappropriate at different ages. And then have open, honest conversations with kids early. Again, this is a link to, and I included it in the handouts, but something that the National Society for Problematic Sexual Behavior in Youth has published, talking about the elephant in the living room, just a way to give parents some language to have these difficult conversations. Parents also need to have a response plan in mind when a child encounters inappropriate electronic content. So many parents aren't prepared to answer uncomfortable questions and may react very strongly and very negatively, which actually discourages youth for bringing future questions. So parents need to be aware that, to respond calmly, to be very upfront about why it's inappropriate for kids their age to be viewing pornography. So something as simple as, these are materials that are made for adult brains to understand. They don't depict what safe and secure relationships look like. And that's why these types of things are reserved for adults. As uncomfortable as it may be, we want parents to be providing age-appropriate sex education from a young age. At the end of the day, I believe that most parents would much rather prefer their children come to them with these questions rather than relying on Google or worse, pornography for sexual education. So the more the parents can be talking about, different body parts, puberty, any of those things early on, the better. There are a lot of books out there that are really great to help parents have those conversations. So how do we as providers talk to parents about this? Again, these are uncomfortable conversations to have. it's important that we're talking about healthy internet usage with all families proactively. Again, everyone is using the internet and social media these days, so it's important for this to just be included in normal conversations at checkups or anything like that. So be talking with parents about how much screen time, what kind of screen time, and how can they monitor that. Provide factual information in a straightforward manner. If we feel uncomfortable talking about pornography and inappropriate internet usage, parents are going to feel uncomfortable and kids are going to feel uncomfortable. This is just another fact of life that we can talk about without any stigma or taboo attached to it. Consider having handouts available to provide to parents. So whether it be the talking to the elephant in the room, anything like that, just to give parents an easy way to take information home. Normalize the prevalence of inappropriate and or sexually explicit material on the internet. Again, the more that they know, the more prepared they can be. And stress the importance of creating a unique plan for each child, considering what's realistic with the family's resources. And again, encouraging those conversations about values that apply to all family members. So as I mentioned, this is the family values worksheet. I really like this worksheet because I think it encourages parents to have conversations they wouldn't normally, but thinking about at what point are these different online activities appropriate for our family. So if that's just having access to social media, using it for 1 to 2 hours or 3 hours, having your own smartphone, watching sexually explicit TV or movies, and deciding at what age is this appropriate and why. When families understand and kind of have these ideas in their heads, it makes it much, much easier for them to have conversations. Some additional resources that are helpful for family. The Family Media Plan, this is a great online resource that helps families create a safe plan. It was created by the American Academy of Pediatrics and just really guides parents kind of in that process of creating boundaries, limits, what is and is not appropriate. So kind of gives them some guidance. NetSmarts is actually something it's an online safety education program that's geared towards kids. So it has videos and activities to help kids be more safe online. Some others, It's Time We Talked is a resource for youth and parents, specifically related to adolescent pornography use. And then some of the others are just kind of, again, informational. Common Sense Media is specific to, it breaks down further what is included in videos and games. So it goes beyond just the simple rating to really talking about, does it include explicit language, explicit sexual content? So parents are making more informed decisions. Okay, these are citations, but I wanted to ensure, I know that was a lot of information. I talked a lot, but wanted to make sure that we left time for any questions that I can answer. And I can scroll back through the chart.
Thank you, Dr. Simmons.
Yeah.
Yes, there was something there that a chat just came through from Dr. Howard, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dr. Howard, I really appreciate these points. I think these are great. Really remembering that addiction can also be diagnosed with clinically significant distress. So if that's feeling really guilty, ashamed, like hating themselves, sometimes when kids are having that compulsive pornographic viewing, they do start to think about themselves very negatively. And when we have that pattern, that vicious cycle, we may be closer to remembering or kind of labeling it as an addiction. And then Dr. Howard also made a really good point that pornography is an industry and it's very much invested in people coming back. So they are going to target kids, target those adolescent brains because that's what makes them money. It's an industry and it's also very exploitative. So all very good points to remember. Thank you, Dr. Howard. Other questions that people have?
And please feel free to unmute yourself if you would like to ask a question. It's not a problem at all to do that. One thing I appreciate about Dr. Simmons is that she really appreciates those questions, as if you have that question, somebody else probably does too.
Mhm. I will say one question that I've gotten from some families recently that we don't necessarily have a ton of research on is related to like AI, Chat GPT, things along those lines. The difficult thing about keeping up with technology is that it's always going to evolve faster than our research can. And so it's really difficult for us to have a full, great understanding of every single thing that's coming out. I think that's why I always encourage families, again, to really rely on their family values to set those limits, because our research just can't keep up with how quickly technology is moving. Laura, how can they get the slideshow or PDFs like of the resources?
They can just email me and
Okay.
I can get that sent off to them. That is not a problem. Actually, you can email our CPAN email address, and I'll put that in the chat here in just a moment.
Yes, and I'll make sure that there is a PDF version of the slideshow, as well as all the resources that I talked about.
Absolutely. And Dr. Carver, we can certainly get that to you right away. If I can't get it to you by the end of the business day today, I will get it to you tomorrow. One of the things that Dr. Simmons is great about is giving us a copy of her slides, and we turn those into a PDF for you.
I know it's a lot of information in an hour, so would love it if you took it home, digest it, and hopefully pass it on to the families that you're working with.
Absolutely. And this will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel. So if you want to go back and listen to it again, I know some people have a kind of a long drive to work. You can always go back and listen to it while you're driving to work, and you'll get a double dose of Dr. Simmons.
I'm not sure that's a good thing, but thank you.
It's all good. It's all good.
Right, thank you. Well,
All
Laura, I'm
right.
happy to hang out for a few minutes if anyone does have additional questions.
That's great.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. And
Thank you.
enjoy.
I appreciate all of y'all being here today.
All right. We are going to be next month facilitating a session, and it is on. I'm going to apologize to you just real quick. I don't have it pulled up here, but we will be presenting another session next month. It'll be presented by Dr. Shannon Metter, who is one of our child psychiatrists here. I'm going to pull up the disclosure slides, and that'll tell me which one it is. But I believe it's on moving beyond some of the diagnosis such as DMDD and ODD and such like that. So I'm pulling that up right now.
Yep, it looks like that's the June one, is moving beyond the red flag diagnoses.
Thank you very much.
It just circulated around.
Thank you. Yes, moving beyond the red flag diagnoses of DMDD, IED, and ODD. And for those of you that don't know that alphabet, I hope you come to our session, because they will be a great addition to your behavioral health knowledge base. And yeah, I think you'll learn a lot. Dr. Metter is great, and I'm sure she'll give a wonderful presentation. And then starting this fall, we'll have OCD again in July. And then starting this fall, our leadership at Baylor College of Medicine will begin to facilitate all of our continuing education sessions for CPAN. And that will be starting on August 12th. And then we will have both CPAN CMEs or webinars, but then we'll also have Project Echo. So every 2 weeks, there'll be an opportunity for more continuing education, Project Echo is about 15 minutes of didactic learning and 45 minutes of case discussion on that topic. And you'll see that what we've tried to do is have the webinar and then the Echo session on a similar topic. So we hope that you join us. If you're interested in receiving continuing education information, please email me at cpaninfo@uttyler.edu, and I'm putting that in here right now. And we'll make sure that we get that continuing education information to you. Any final questions? All right, it's top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and call it for today. Thank you so much for joining us today, and
Thank you.
we hope you have a great day.